because, like, if I have 3 drinks and don't drink a whole shit pile of water and be really careful about it and not drink anything else, I've had hangovers without even feeling the alcohol. So and it's not just the headache; it's the stomach upset as well. So
it is,
I do have to be really careful with that.
If I drink, especially if I drink a lot of Melomels, I get such awful heartburn, just nasty, and then that's just miserable. You know, I mean, it sucks all the fun out of the mead at that point.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
So, all right. So we could like talk about drinking all night, but why don't we move on? Yeah. Why don't we? I want to put my producer hat on here. Why don't we move on to questions? Because we have some.
Sure, but before we do that, very quickly, for all of our listeners out there, tonight is the kind of information it's going to all make sense at the end of the day. Hopefully. I mean, I know it will, but I guess what I'm saying is, before we actually get started with that portion of the program, go grab a piece of paper and a pen, because I'm going to be giving you a lot of information in little chunks, and each of the little chunks are important in and of themselves. And then eventually later on, once we look at some of the independent pieces that we're going to talk about, we're then going to learn how to try to work them all together in kind of like a color wheel. If you guys know anything about making color, you can look at the wheel and you can look at the opposite of a particular color, and that'll show you what the blend of 2 other colors melded together will create on the far side of the color wheel. It just so happens that a lot of what we're going to talk tonight kind of is what I like to kind of consider is their spokes on a bicycle wheel. And a spoke on one side of the wheel can be counterbalanced, if you will, with the spoke on the other side of the wheel. And so we're going to be looking at these different pieces that counterbalance each other, and I'm going to use oftentimes a reference of a teeter-totter, because we can put one thing on one side of the teeter-totter and we can put something else on the other side of the teeter-totter. And I just feel like, for sure, if you have a piece of paper and a pencil, when we get started to do that, this is going to make a million times more sense than if you can grab it all in your brains at one time. I know I certainly can't, but part of that's from being old and
too much mead.
Casually in the 70s, yes, and then too much mead in my older years. So anyway, go get some paper and a pencil, and we're going to go, as Vicki said, over to the question department right now.
And before he gets into those questions, if you guys have questions that come up, because I see stuff coming up on the chat after the show's over and so on and so forth, feel free to send them to us at gotmeadlive@gotmead.com, or go fill out the form on the website that's under the Got Mead Live show, because we'll take any and all questions and answer them on the next show. So,
yes,
it doesn't matter what we talked about or what we're going to talk about. We will answer your questions. So please do send them. We love your questions. All right. Sorry, Ryan. Go ahead.
No, that's quite all right. And I second that. We do want to answer your questions. I know part of the reason why I'm here now, I certainly don't have all the answers by any chance, but I've gotten pretty good, and I feel like I'm just now at a place where I'm going to start screaming through outer space at light years speed. But when I first started, there was so much contrary information. I could go and read for a day and learn a whole bunch of stuff that would support one side of the coin, and there would be equally as much stuff on the other side of the coin. And when you're brand new, part of the frustration, as you guys are, I'm sure, all familiar with, is there's just too much BS out there in the internet, and until you've been around for a while, you really don't know how to wade through all of that mess. And so one of the reasons that I'm here is kind of to pay it forward, but also, I want everybody to make good mead, and I want to help you to get through that learning curve in the front end that can be so frustrating, and it could be expensive depending on how many batches you have to end up tossing away and all of that. So that's why I'm here, and we want to answer all your questions with good answers that are backed with science, not just... You see, one of the problems is everybody in the world about anything anymore can get on in YouTube, and in 2 hours' time, everybody thinks they're an expert about everything. And so now you got a whole bunch of experts that don't have any real experience, and they've read enough that they now have answers, but most of the time, quite frankly, most of the answers are things that they've heard other parrots parroting, meaning... At one time, the world was flat, right? one smart guy somewhere stood up and said, "I believe the world is flat," and because he was smart enough, or he was enough of a shyster that people believed he was smart, or for whatever reason, somebody said, and so now you got two guys going around saying the world is flat, and then other people that got on YouTube back then and saw that the world was flat. Pretty soon, everybody's saying the world was flat, and it's not.
Well, we have a flat world conference that went on this week in Raleigh, believe it or not.
There you go.
Yeah, and I wanted to go down and buy a souvenir so I could mock them, It's like, here's my money, give me that pretty plate, and I'm going to mock you now.
Right, So we want to give you good answers. And there's many ways to skin a cat, but there's definitely better ways to skin a cat than others. So that's why we're here, and this is really your show. And so please, please, please send us your questions. So with that, you guys, what's the first question we have?
Okay, first question we have is from Danny, and he says, if yeast don't like the sunlight, would it be possible to kill yeast effectively with either the sun or grow lights without losing much of the mead's flavors? It's a good question.
Yeah, and Danny actually asked me this a couple days ago, and Danny, I had never heard anything about the effectiveness or lack of the UV rays killing the yeast until I went and looked at that link that you had sent me. I've been extremely busy at work, and I haven't been able to go dig, to find out any more about that. So that was the first exposure that I had in regards to that. So I don't have a very strong answer. I guess my first answer comes out of a point of reasoning. And not to be a smartass, but my answer would be, I don't know that that's really something that I'd have too much of an interest exploring, simply because we have so many other ways that we can stabilize our meads that work. If it's not broke, don't fix it. And so maybe that's something, and I would think if it is something that's very viable, we would hear that from a lot of the professional meaderies about having some kind of a UV machine that they could run their meads through to kill off the yeast. So that might happen. And go ahead, AJ.
There are UV filtration systems for water, but what I know of those is they only work if the water's absolutely clear. If you've got any kind of turbidity at all, it misses things. So that's probably one of the reasons why you don't see that. Because if,
the meads are turbid.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. If the yeast is still there. So, it's possible. Somebody might at some point go and take a UV water filter and convert it over so that they can use it in mead. Hopefully the results will not be as exciting as when you use something other than water in a soda stream.
Yeah, I've done that, and it's, it's not pretty. I saw somebody on the mead makers group, and they'd put their mead in a soda stream because they wanted to carbonate it. It did not work out well.
Big sticky mess.
Big sticky mess. Yeah, all over the ceiling is what it was.
So our next question is also from Danny, and the question is: are there fermenters that can stir automatically?
Just on that first, Ryan.
Hamish, mute. Hamish, mute. Hang on, I'm going to hang up on Hamish here.
Yeah, hang on.
I just hung up on Hamish.
I think he was trying to say something.
Yeah, well, tough shit. Background chatter. He can come back in later.
So the question is, are there fermenters that can stir automatically that are homebrewer cost effective? To my knowledge, I've seen a few startup programs with fermenters that could do a little more than just sit there. But I didn't ever see that any of those have taken off. I know we have a guy that's a friend of mine from Sweden that's on the Got Mead forums, and he hasn't been around for a little while. His dad just recently died. So send him some good vibes or prayers or whatever you guys all do for him. But anyway, he's kind of a engineer type, and he's been creating something that is actually doing this at home at his place, but right now he's just doing it as a toy or for fun for himself. So to the best of my knowledge, there are not any of those types of things available. currently on the market, but I could be missing something. So that's all I have on that.
Okay. So then the
Ryan,
next... There he is.
Just on the UV thing.
Yeah. Hi, Hamish.
UV works. Yeah, hi guys. How are you? UV works because it's really destructive. It likes to break things up. It likes to damage stuff. It will strip ozone back into oxygen and rip molecules apart. And that's how it actually, one of the ways it actually sterilizes. And so I think from what people say about needing to cellar mead and wine in a dark place as well as a cool place and keeping it out of the sunlight means that the UV will actually damage the mead. I'm almost certain of it.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
Yeah,
Especially
I've had mead change flavors that got in the sun too much, and yeah, it wasn't in a good way.
No, I don't know if this is an absolute fact, but I believe it to be based on some answers I got from people that I trust well enough that I didn't pursue it anymore. But my understanding that is if you have dry hopped meads, they will get skunky through UV exposure. So that's one thing you might want to keep in mind when you're carrying around meads that you've got hops in them, is to keep them out of the sunlight, or better yet, bottle them in a gray bottle instead of a white. Or I guess green would be better than white, but brown is better than green, I believe. So yeah, Hamish, if you think about a car that sat out in the sunlight for a long time, I know that seems like sun affects the color red very quickly compared to other colors, and so yeah, I could see that ruining your mead just by if nothing else, destroying all the polyphenols in there that are your color fragments and yeast as well. So good
The thing
point.
is, though, that's a long-term exposure, whereas the UV exposure is actually quite short. It's kind of like nuking it. It doesn't take very long to actually pass it through the UV filter, so it may end up working, not damaging it. I think it's Joe on the live feed saying that that's how some of the orchards treat their cider.
I see.
So it's possible. It might be worth exploring.
Yeah.
But again, there's not going to be. It's like boiling something or irradiating it or whatever. It's only good until you touch it again, and then it's not like chlorine or chloramines or sulfates, where you're going to end up with the residual ability to continue keeping things sanitized.
Right.
It's a one and done. It's not there's no continual anything about it. Mm-hmm. Now, just specifically to kill yeast, it might be worth exploring.
Yeah. And
if you do, we really, really want to hear about it.
Yeah, we do. If you do that, somebody do a write-up. We'll put it on Got Mead, totally. Danny had a follow-up on the stir and asked, is that the one with the siphon pump?
Yes, I believe it is.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so the next questions come from Curtis, and he's asking, how many days after the start of primary fermentation should you stir twice a day? Good question.
Right, and I'll finish reading the rest of the question because it continues on. It says, I thought it was 7 days, but I believe on the last program you said it was 10 days, so why 10 versus 7? He goes on to say, I've been following Tosna and stirring for 7 days after the start of an active fermentation. I never thought about why, so it shows you're a good teacher.
Yeah, he's just complimenting you there, yeah.
Okay. Well, so as we so often find, once we begin to understand this whole process of mead making a little bit more, very little is really said and done on very exact days. So you say, well, why 7 versus 10? We have a tendency, I think, in our society that we want to quantify everything, and everything has to have. I want you guys to know the why always, but I think we too oftentimes get hung up in the nomenclature of all that. So here's my answer. To be truly as honest as I could I would say that the amount of stirring that we do, and the purpose of the stirring, right, is to degas. We want to eliminate the CO2 that's in suspension. The reason we want to do that is that it can become toxic to the yeast, and as we let it build up in our must, it's going to start driving